Hello and welcome. We're pleased to have people joining from all over the world. Today, we're having a conversation about the urgent need for new, effective treatments for people with progressive MS. During our time together, we'll be discussing treatments for people with progressive MS, including what is currently available, potential new treatments that are in clinical trials, and how research discoveries may lead us to our ultimate goal of ending MS progression. My name is Kathy Smith, and I live in the United States. My professional background includes more than 25 years of working in the pharmaceutical industry, in research, clinical development, and business development. Additionally, I've worked with the International Progressive MS Alliance on key initiatives to advance treatment development. I also am living with MS, and I was diagnosed in 2004. I'm a passionate advocate and fundraiser for the National MS Society in the United States. In a moment, I will introduce you to our outstanding panel of experts. But first, I'd like to recognize our webcast sponsor and share some information about the International Progressive MS Alliance. We are grateful for the generous support of our sponsor, Sanofi. Thank you for helping make this webcast possible. The Alliance is an unprecedented global collaboration to end progressive MS. It includes 20 MS organizations, hundreds of researchers and health professionals, the pharmaceutical industry, companies, foundations, donors, and people affected by progressive MS. In short, the Alliance has brought the world together to solve progressive MS. To date, the Alliance has invested over 25 million euros in research, with an overall commitment of 60 million euros through 2025. Very impressive. Let's get to today's discussion. With me today are leading MS experts who are working to help people with MS live better lives today and help fuel research to help end MS progression. Dr. Robert Fox is a staff neurologist at the Mellon Center for Multiple Sclerosis and vice chair for research at the Neurological Institute at the Cleveland Clinic in the United States. He also serves as the chair of the Alliance Scientific Steering Committee. He's been involved in a number of clinical trials and published more than 200 papers, book chapters, and books. Dr. Don Mahad is a senior clinical lecturer and honorary consultant neurologist at the University of Edinburgh in the United Kingdom. His research is focused on the bioenergetic changes in progressive multiple sclerosis, and he has authored numerous papers. He's also the recipient of an Alliance Challenges in Progressive MS Research Award. And Dr. Claire Walton is the head of research at the MS Society in the United Kingdom, where she looks after their research funding program and related strategic projects. Claire's field of expertise is in neural stem cells and brain repair in neurological conditions. We'll start today's discussion reviewing the current treatment options for people with progressive MS. Then we'll talk about potential treatments in clinical trials. And finally, we'll talk about research efforts to find new and better solutions. Dr. Fox, let me begin with you. Depending on where you live in the world, there may be as many as 25 treatments for relapsing remitting MS. Yet it seems that there is very little or perhaps nothing for most people with progressive MS. What do you tell your patients with progressive MS about current treatment options?
Well, hi, Kathy. Thank you very much for allowing me to join you all here. Indeed, there has been great progress in addressing the inflammatory aspects of MS. But as a field, we've struggled to develop therapies that slow the disease progression. Now, some people with progressive MS have both active inflammation, which manifests as relapses, clinical episodes, clinical relapses, and new lesions on MRI. And for those patients, our current anti-inflammatory therapies may be appropriate to reduce that active inflammation. But that turns out to be a relatively less common situation. The more common situation is for patients with progressive MS to have only the gradual, little by little decline in their neurologic function without a recent relapse or new lesions on MRI. And for those patients, we really don't have good treatment options that have been shown to slow that progression.
Very interesting. And as a follow-on to that, Dr. Fox, if there isn't a treatment available for someone with progressive MS to slow down progression, what can be done to help an individual maintain their health and improve quality of life?
Well, in those cases, I shift my focus. I shift my focus to optimizing how their symptoms are being managed, meaning how the patient is adapting to whatever limitations or whatever symptoms their MS has caused, so that they can optimize how they are functioning, how they are living their everyday life. I also focus on other conditions that we know can impact progression. For example, diabetes and heart disease, high blood pressure, and smoking. It's often underappreciated how these other medical conditions can impact MS. Exercise is important as well, to the degree that it can be performed, which varies from patient to patient. But encouraging exercise to whatever degree they can, and addressing mental health, so emotional health, which can also have a dramatic impact on quality of life. So focusing on symptoms, exercise, mental and emotional health, and other conditions that can still have a dramatic impact on how patients function and their quality of life.
Thank you. Dr. Fox, you've been involved in a number of clinical trials to develop MS treatments. Why is it so challenging to develop therapies for progressive MS?
Yeah, so there are several challenges that we face in terms of finding effective therapies. One of the biggest challenges is we don't know what causes progression. What is the real biologic pathway or mechanism that drives progression in progressive MS? I think we'll be circling back to that in a moment here on this call. Also, we don't have a good biomarker for progression. Now, a biomarker is a biological marker that indicates what's going on within the body. Like bone density is a biomarker for osteoporosis. Blood tests of liver function are a biomarker of the health of someone's liver. For progressive MS, whole brain atrophy, or the amount of shrinkage of the brain overall, that's currently the most widely utilized biomarker for progressive MS. But that is a pretty far down the cascade of events measure in terms of the MS mechanism, because it measures the end result, brain shrinkage, injury to the brain. So we need better measures of how a treatment may intervene over a relatively short period of time, because having a better measure would allow us to conduct smaller, faster trials to identify promising therapies. Several outcomes have been suggested to replace whole brain atrophy for progressive MS trials. There are imaging measures, there are fluid biomarker measures, there are physiologic measures of how the brain and spinal cord and body are functioning. But we don't know really which one of those is best. And it may be that there's a different biomarker depending on what area is being focused for treatment.
Yeah, thank you. So even though there are many challenges, as you've noted, it's really encouraging to see that there are some clinical trials currently focused on treatments for people with progressive MS. Dr. Fox, can you describe some of these efforts?
Yeah, so there really is some good news here and exciting news. There are many, many trials now testing new therapies in progressive MS. They span the range of very early, small, safety focused trials to large phase 3 trials, which are the final stage before a therapy might be approved for general clinical use in progressive MS. Phase 3 trials in progressive MS, that's that final stage before potential approval, are testing several different things. One is a new class of treatment, BTK inhibitors. So, two of them, tolebrutinib and fenebrutinib. There are also two trials of current immune modulating therapies, ocrelizumab and cladribine. There's even a phase 3 trial of an old cholesterol drug, simvastatin, which is being studied in the United Kingdom in secondary progressive MS. So there are also many, many earlier stage trials of other therapies, too many to list here, but there is definitely a lot going on across the whole range, the whole span of stages of trials finding therapies for progressive MS.
Well, that all sounds really promising. Thank you. As you mentioned earlier, it's clear that research is needed to develop a much better understanding of progression in MS. Dr. Mahad, your research focuses on bioenergetic changes in progressive MS. Could you tell us what that means and why it's important?
Thanks, Kathy. So energy is really highly important for the nervous system, both for its function and maintaining its structure. For example, the brain accounts for about 2% of our total body weight, but yet it uses about 20% of the total body energy consumption. So that makes studying energy or energetics in the nervous system or the brain quite exciting from a research point of view. What makes it even more exciting in MS is the damage to myelin, the protective sheath of the nerve fibers, actually has a major impact on the energy balance within the brain and the spinal cord. It really increases the energy that's required for the nerve cells to function. So it's sort of a complete shift from normal development where the myelin has been laid down, and when you lose the myelin, the energy requirements of the nerve cells really shoot up like really quickly. So I'm confident that by understanding these, that we can sort of translate the research excitement into discovering new treatments for protecting nerve fibers and nerve cells in progressive MS in particular.
Yeah, so interesting. Dr. Mahat, based on your findings, you're working on a potential neuroprotective treatment for people with progressive MS. Can you share some more about this important research?
So with funding we've already received from the Progressive MS Alliance, the National MS Society and the UK MS Society, we've discovered a way how the nerve cell actually responds to damage to myelin, how it tries to provide the energy requirements. And it's a natural neuronal response. And we've been able to modify that using different methods. So genetics, compounds, and even drugs that could be repurposed to protect even more nerve fibers, right? So that was the background to our current project that's been funded by the Progressive MS Alliance, which is a collaborative project with the Neurosciences Department at the Cleveland Clinic and ourselves based in Edinburgh. This is really one of the key reasons is to look at the long-term safety of boosting this particular neuronal response, and that focuses on energy and energy production by tiny little powerhouses called mitochondria. So we're hoping that we'll be able to get more useful insight in a long-term way about neuroprotection.
Thank you for that. That all sounds really interesting. And when do you hope to be able to report the results of your Alliance-funded research?
So the proposal is 3 years long. I think by midpoint, just over 18 months, we should be able to find out whether this strategy of sort of enhancing the natural neuronal response is safe in the long term, safe meaning in experimental models. And then we would find in a broader sense what are the other neuronal responses, because there's bound to be a lot more, and get more insight into some of the drugs that we are using to tweak this response, and how the drugs work. So we hopefully will be able to discover even more targets, which would probably come towards the end of the 3 years.
Great, thank you. We'll look forward to that report out as it comes along. So I know that there are some other exciting efforts that are occurring. Dr. Walton, people with progressive MS urgently need effective treatments, and yet we know that clinical trials can take a long time and be very expensive. The MS Society in the UK is working to change that through a novel approach called Octopus. What is this initiative, and how does it work?
So Octopus is the first adaptive clinical trial for MS in the world. What that means is it's kind of like a mega trial, so we can test more than one treatment at once. So we talk about having multiple treatment arms, which is where it aptly gets its name, Octopus. So as well as testing multiple treatments in parallel, Octopus also combines 2 stages of clinical trials into one. So we test treatments first in a relatively small group of people, in about 125 people per treatment arm. And then we have a look after 18 months to see if there's been any meaningful change on brain MRI. So as Dr. Fox alluded to, the brain gradually shrinks as we get older. And in MS, in progressive MS, that is fast, it is accelerated. So the trial team will look after 18 months of taking one of the treatments and see if that shrinking has been slowed in any way. And if it has, that's a really good indication that the drug might actually be working to slow down disease progression. So if there's a positive signal on MRI, then we will add more people into that treatment arm. So more people will take the particular treatment, and we'll follow them for a longer period to see if that treatment is really having a positive effect on the accumulation of disability. But in the converse, if there's no signal on MRI at that, what we call interim analysis, then we will terminate that treatment arm, because it really means it's not looking very likely. And what that means is we can avoid wasting energy, money, and people's time on treatments that are less likely to be effective, and really concentrate on the ones that are most promising. So Octopus is kind of a rolling trial. So when researchers like Don here uncover new treatments in the lab, they could potentially then be added into Octopus as new treatment arms. So as the research progress happens, this rolling treatment can add in, this rolling trial, sorry, can add in more treatment arms, and it can keep going until we find treatments that work to slow or stop progression. The approach has been really successful in prostate cancer, where an adaptive clinical trial called Stampede has resulted in 7 changes to clinical practice for men living with prostate cancer in a 15-year period. So we've been working for about a decade now, actually, with the UK MS research community to try to bring this innovative trial approach into MS. And so we're really excited now to see that it's finally up and running.
Yeah, sounds incredibly promising and innovative. Thank you. Dr. Walton, can you give us a status report on how it's going, and tell us about how many sites and patients are involved so far?
Sure. So we've started Octopus with 3 arms. So the first arm is kind of standard care. So participants could be on whatever drug they might already be on that's already licensed for progressive MS. That's kind of the control arm. And then we currently have 2 treatment arms in the works. So one is testing metformin, which is a popular diabetes drug. And the other one is testing alpha lipoic acid, which is an antioxidant supplement. And both of these treatments have been shown to have neuroprotective properties. So that means they can support nerve cells to resist damage. And metformin, the diabetes drug, has also studies that it might be able to boost the process of myelin repair as well. So we currently have about 120 people registered, recruited into the trial across 12 sites in the UK, and that's covering all 4 of the UK nations. And with analysis is 375 people for that stage. Once we've done that and we pass into the stage 2, we will add many more participants at that point, and we expect to open about a dozen more sites across the UK.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks for that update. And then a final note on this. The Octopus clinical trials have prompted a partnership in Australia called Platypus. Can you give us an idea on how this effort is now becoming international?
Yeah, Platypus is a great name for a start. It's a collaboration between MS Western Australia and MS Australia. So they are jointly funding a branch of Octopus in Australia called Platypus. It has its own lead investigator and it will be recruiting at multiple sites across Australia, but it is part of the Octopus core trial. So it will use exactly the same protocol, and all the MRI images that they collect in Australia and all the trial data will be stored centrally in the UK. So it's part of the trial. It sits under the kind of umbrella of Octopus. And it's fantastic, not only because it means people living in Australia will also have the chance to take part in the trial, but it also means it will ultimately speed up recruitment, making Octopus run faster, helping us find treatments sooner, and also contributing to the long-term sustainability of the trial platform.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. Really interesting. So let's switch again. So Dr. Fox, as chair of the Alliance Scientific Steering Committee, there are I know several Alliance research projects on treatment development. Can you give us a short overview of these?
Yes, there are certainly many exciting things going on around the globe, and quite a few of them are supported by the Alliance. So 6 new Challenge and Progressive MS Awards were announced just a few months ago, some of which will be doing early trials on potential new treatments. And through these awards, we'll be creating new knowledge about what leads to progression and also identifying new targets for treatment development. Also, 2 international drug discovery networks are funded by the Alliance. These networks are large-scale, first-of-their-kind efforts, international, global, collaborative efforts to develop new treatments for people with progressive MS. One of these, led by Professor Francisco Quintana from Harvard University, was just awarded an additional 3 million euros in funding to advance studies around their discovery of a compound that may stop MS progression. The next steps in this area are to refine this compound, perhaps changing it a little bit to optimize it, and test the most promising final compound formula for its effect in progressive MS. If successful, the compound would then be ready to test in people, which would really be exciting. The other network, led by Professor Gianvito Martino, that network of researchers has also identified a potential treatment for progressive MS and is developing their plan to move forward towards clinical trials. So there is a lot going on supported by the Alliance, looking for therapies to treat progressive MS.
Thank you. It's so encouraging to see multiple efforts working on breakthrough solutions. So we're near the end of our time. So I wanted to ask each panelist to share what they find the most promising about the future in terms of new life-changing treatments for people with progressive MS. Let's start with you, Dr. Fox. What is most promising to you?
Well, I'll start by saying that when sometimes I see new patients for whom I don't really know quite what's going on with them, I'll admit that I don't know what's going on with them, but I'm going to do the next best thing, which is to outline a plan to figure it out. And I think we're at the same place with progressive MS. We don't have a therapy that has been shown to be truly effective in slowing progression. But we are doing the next best thing, and that's to identify a pathway to find one. That pathway includes understanding the biology of progressive MS, building mechanisms to find new therapies based on those pathways, identifying biomarkers to measure the effect of those therapies in progressive MS. So what excites me the most is that although we don't have the answer yet, I think we have a much clearer sense of the path that will lead us to some answers.
Thank you. Dr. Mahad, what do you think the future will bring for people with progressive MS?
Kathy, I'm quite optimistic. I think that we'll be able to sort of continue to delay progression and hopefully stop progression. And thinking about treatments as a sort of a combination approach with the current disease-modifying therapies. Claire's already mentioned about the Octopus, how you add on the other treatments. So combining disease-modifying therapy with neuroprotective therapy and repair, like remyelination therapy. And I think increasingly as clinicians, Bob referred to that about the biomarkers and trying to identify early changes and identifying progressive MS and targeting it early, particularly with neuroprotection, I think would be another, hopefully, development that we would see in the near future.
Thank you. I share your optimism. And Dr. Walton, what would you highlight?
I think in recent years, our understanding of the progression that takes place in between or independent of relapses has really leapt forward. And it's only since we've been using, the effective disease-modifying therapies to actually slow and stop relapses that I think the significance of this kind of type of progression has really come to the forefront, and we can realize how important it actually is on how someone's MS unfolds over their lifetime. So I think that there's a big global effort now to really understand the biology of that type of progression and what's happening when progression starts right from the start. And I think those discoveries are really novel and will really help us to get a proper grip on what's driving the processes. So I think that kind of uncover the kind of shift in our thinking of how progression works in between relapses is really important and will hopefully lead to the speeding up of the development of treatments.
Thank you. What an interesting conversation. So today we addressed some of the leading questions regarding developing new treatments for people with progressive MS. This is a vital and urgent effort. As I hope you've experienced with today's panelists, there are talented, dedicated people working to find solutions to the challenges that people affected by progressive MS face. And the International Progressive MS Alliance continues to inspire hope and make progress through funding research that can improve people's lives. Still, we must and we will do more to end progressive MS. Thank you very much to our panel of experts, Dr. Fox, Dr. Mahad, and Dr. Walton. And thanks to all of you. And thanks to all of you for watching and joining us today. Please stay connected to the Alliance through our regular webcasts and your MS organization. And please share the work of the Alliance with others. We need everyone to be a part of this effort. Together, we are stronger than progressive MS. Thank you.